Hello and welcome to Fast Talk, your source for the science of endurance performance. I'm your host, Trevor Connor, here with Chris Case. Many of the biggest and most exciting training innovations over the last 20 years haven't come from what we do on the bike, but from the software we use to track, monitor, and plan our training. Some of us still remember when pro-level tracking meant scribbling time, distance, and average heart rate on a sheet of paper. Today's training software can highlight an athlete's strengths and weaknesses, monitor sleep and recovery, suggest workouts, and provide detailed analysis that physiology teams could only dream of a few decades ago. And these platforms are only advancing faster. So in this episode, we'll explore the biggest current trends in training software. Our guest is Lee Gerakos, CEO of TrainingPeaks, but this is not an episode about TrainingPeaks itself. Instead, we asked an AI tool to identify the most important current trends across platforms, whether or not TrainingPeaks uses them. And we'll examine each, what innovations they bring, what's overhyped, and where caution is needed. We'll start with AI, not to continue the debate if it's taking over, but to consider how it should and shouldn't be used as a tool. From there, we'll look at integration, combining workout logs, sleep scores, and biomechanical data into one platform. Next, we'll discuss platforms offering daily assessments and recommendations, and whether they can ever match the insights of a coach. Finally, we'll dig into gamification and the growing use of social features. Joining Gerakos, we'll also hear from Dr. Andy Pruitt and Ryan Ignatz, two leading bike fitters. Cyclist and podcast host Jack Burke, who emphasizes the importance of mentors. Robbie Ventura, owner of the Velocity training platform, who discusses data integration. And pro cyclist Matt Sharp, who shares how he and his coach use virtual training. We've wanted to have Lee on the show for a couple years now. His insights have always been really thoughtful whenever we talk with him. We thought it'd be great to get him on the show and have him share some of the things he's shared with us, with all of you, our listeners. And thanks to our partnership now with TrainingPeaks, we're thrilled to finally have this humble CEO join us. As I'll mention later in this episode, when I started out tracking my data, I was literally pulling it into an Excel sheet and having to line everything up just to get some decent data. I have been using TrainingPeaks or Cycling Peaks or WKO, all the different iterations and names for countless years. And one of the things I have appreciated is that their changes and improvements have been extraordinary, but they've also been incredibly thoughtful. I have used other software for other reasons where they make big changes and you just look at the changes and go, why'd you do that? I've never said that with their improvements. It has been iterative. They haven't jumped on every single innovation. It's something that they think through. It's something that they make sure it meets their primary mission, which is to help athletes track their data and to help coaches and athletes communicate with one another. And where the innovations help that, they integrate it. And when the innovations don't help that, they talk about it, but they're very wary. That said, TrainingPeaks is adding tons of new features all the time. Even in the last year or two, they have added the Strength Builder. They've added TrainingPeaks Virtual, Fuel Insights. I believe they've added about 46 new sports subtypes. They're allowing payments, stacked charts. They've added women's health metrics. So it's not like they're not innovating. As a matter of fact, they are doing a ton. But as I said, the thing that I appreciate about TrainingPeaks is it is always very well thought out. And I think as we talk with Lee today, you're going to see just how thoughtful he is about all this and how much consideration they give before they say, let's add this chart or let's add that feature. So if you're ready to take a deeper dive into the data and some of these new features, for a limited time, get 20% off a TrainingPeaks premium subscription with code FASTTALK. That's code FASTTALK for 20% off. So all that being said, put on your best trending hat and let's make it fast. Well, Lee, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
So this episode has actually been in the makings for a while. There's a history to this that I need to quickly explain. You and I have done a couple winter rides together. You've invited me, warned that you're an age group rider, you're not nearly as fast as me, and then we get on the bikes and then you, for 3 hours, absolutely destroy me.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, it tends to hurt. But when we've done these rides, it's been really fascinating conversations that I've really appreciated. You've wanted to talk about the science, talk about the research. I can tell that you're thinking about all this in terms of what you want to do at TrainingPeaks, but something I've really appreciated is whether we're talking about something that TrainingPeaks does or doesn't do, you've been very reflective in the conversations. And even if it's something that TrainingPeaks isn't doing, you want to learn about it, you want to hear about it, you want to bat it around, discuss the pros and cons of it. And I always really appreciated that both kind of humility and reflection that you've shown in all these different topics. So that is what motivated me to reach out to you actually a long time ago to come on the show, and basically said, just come and let's have one of those conversations that we've had on these bike rides.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think that for me personally, cycling has been such a huge part of my life. And not only cycling itself, but coaches. And I didn't grow up as an athlete, really. And when I moved here to Colorado, I was just amazed by how much people enjoyed life and how much endurance sport was part of that and the culture of it. And very early on, I just got into it, but also realized that I didn't know exactly what I was doing. Just like any journey in education, I worked with a coach and he was fabulous. It really changed my whole experience within this sport. And that was 20 years ago. And I'm still in touch with him today. And when we got together, it was really an honor for me because I've been listening and learning from you both for the last 20 years as well. And so I appreciate the kind words, but right back at you with regard to everything I have learned from you both over the years, as well as during that ride.
Well, really appreciate you saying that as well. So this is going to be a bit of a unique conversation because what's important is we just want to talk about what is happening with the training platforms, what we see in the future. So this isn't directly a conversation about TrainingPeaks. This wasn't, let's bring you in and talk about what you are doing at TrainingPeaks. I know you'll probably bring TrainingPeaks up a lot, but it's that broader conversation about what is going on. And we're also going to talk about things that you're not doing at TrainingPeaks that you might be considering but haven't decided whether you're going to do it or not. And it's really just this broader conversation about there are a lot of changes happening in the training platforms and the data and how you're seeing it, how you're thinking about it. And like I said, sometimes TrainingPeaks will come into that and you might be doing something with it. Sometimes it's just, hey, here's my feeling about it, but we haven't even considered it yet.
Yeah.
Before we dive into all the trends and training platforms, I think it's important to remind all of us about what we're trying to accomplish in the end. Here's Dr. Andy Pruitt and Ryan Ignatz boiling it down to something that's really basic, but really important.
I think work is work, and whatever motivates you to do work. To me, that's the bottom line. If it's Zwift, I don't care what it is, as long as you're motivated to do work. Some people need something new to motivate them. Some of us, old habits die hard. So I can't say that I'm a fan or not a fan of the new things because I just think whatever motivates somebody to work hard.
Interesting answer. Ryan, any thoughts?
That's such a brilliant answer. Yeah, because I agree with the ideas of whatever motivates you to do what you need to do to accomplish that goal. I think that's the bottom line. And I think there's an element of mixing it up as well that often is overlooked, and people get, again, stuck in a rut, or they're just so comfortable with a certain coach. Often I think they start to see a plateau, so they need something different. They need some change. So whatever that stimulus platform is, then I think move towards it.
So the other thing I'm going to say is we are going to start with talking about the impact of AI, but this is not an episode about AI. This is an episode about all the trends that we're seeing in training platforms and data. That said, AI is having an impact on everything. So I think it's going to come up throughout this episode, not because we want to focus on AI, just because that is what is having the biggest impact right now. So I think it's where we need to start. And I know you want to address this, so I'm going to throw the question to you, but I think it's important to start by saying AI is a tool. I know there's coaches that are worried about AI replacing them, and there are people out there trying to develop AI tools that can replace the coach, but there's also people out there that are trying to use AI to enhance and help the coach. AI is not trying implicitly to be one thing or be another thing. It is a tool that we can use any way that we want. So it can go all these different directions. So with that, I'll throw it to you. Where do you think this is all going?
Sure. So I guess to provide a little context in terms of where my opinion is coming from, I've been a software engineer and a technologist pretty much all my whole life. I started as a software engineer and really quickly found myself working in big data, in machine learning systems. I got my master's here at CU right across the street, and I took ML courses there. And I have seen technology continue to progress over that whole period. And each time there's a wave, there's always like, what is this disruption going to do? How is it going to displace everything going on? And Gartner has this, what they call the tech hype cycle, right? So there's some trigger, technology trigger, that gets everyone really excited about it. And then you hit peak inflation of expectations. And then it starts to wane as people start to be like, oh, this is actually going to take probably a little bit longer than we think, to where you start to get to this plateau of like adoption and efficiency, and it's incorporated. And so with AI right now, with OpenAI and what came out in the last couple of years, it's really kind of brought itself to the forefront because we finally have something that's very consumer facing that people can interact with and see, oh, wow, this is what this can do for us. Now, as a tool, it's been applied throughout, even within TrainingPeaks, it's been in the product for years, right? Like there's a number of places in which we have machine learning today. So if you take your TSS, which is based off your power meter, that is a very discrete derived metric that is taken directly from the power meter. When it comes to heart rate TSS or run TSS, those are derived metrics where machine learning techniques were applied, right? And you see that a lot more within WKO as well. Every technology, though, can be applied as a tool. With regard to AI specifically, it's such a broad topic. And what we need to do is also, I think, define some of those categories. So we can jump right into generative AI where ChatGPT is today, or we can talk about some of what those different categories are.
Yeah, that's where we were going to go, is define AI, because I think it's a term that people use, and obviously marketing has jumped on it and said, oh, we're using AI for this or that. And I still remember one guest on the show saying 90% of what people are claiming is AI is not actually AI.
So at its core, what we are trying to do is create human intelligence, right? So how can we infer in reason? And if you categorize that, that can come up in a number of different ways. To your point of like true AI or not, what you're probably just talking about there are expert systems. So those are those rule-based engines where a bunch of knowledge has been kind of like codified in terms of that if then else logic of, in this situation, drive this outcome. In this other situation, do this other thing. That is separate from machine learning, which is how do I take just a corpus of massive amounts of data and understand what is going on and identifying patterns. And then finally, you can take the machine learning, then you have deep learning, and then you have things like neural networks. And I know Alan Cousins was on a couple of years ago talking about that. And that is where you allow the machine to really kind of like distill and pull out the features that may help derive an outcome. And then obviously we have generative AI now, which is how can I produce new information or content based on a corpus of existing information? At the end of the day, too, most of these techniques are about probabilities. So it's not a perfect science, right? It is about what is the greatest predictor of the future? It's past behavior. And that is something that, I've heard Andy Coggins talk about with regard to the greatest predictor of performance is past performance. Mark Twain talked about history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so there's kind of like this continuous theme of how do we learn from the past and apply it to the future? And that's a lot of what AI is trying to do.
So I was out for a ride 2 weeks ago with a gentleman named Will Murray, who's on the board over at USA Triathlon, and we got into this conversation. And he made a really interesting point that I had to give a lot of thought to, which is AI by definition is trying to mimic human intelligence. But what we have to remember is we've gotten really good at having it create an output that is written in a way that we can understand, that looks like it's thinking the way we're thinking. But AI does not think the way a human thinks. It thinks very differently. And then what it produces, we think of as, well, that looks like human intelligence. And the question is, what impact is that going to have? That we think it's thinking like a human, but it's not. It thinks completely differently.
Yeah, I think what it is good for is helping us understand. And this is why I think for the coaches, there's actually tremendous benefit. Because in my experience, what I've often seen is that there are certain things that you just don't think about or consider. They're kind of buried, and they're relationships that seem non-obvious, but they actually help provide information and better understanding. I think where we can run into problems sometimes is when we talk about AI taking over. All of a sudden it is, the AI told me to do this. And there's a funny episode from The Office where Michael and Dwight, they're on the way to visit a client. And they're at the intersection of a corner, and there's the GPS that's telling them to turn right. Right? And they're like, no, you need to go to the corner. No, the GPS is telling me to turn right here. And they go right into the lake. Right. Yeah. And that's obviously an over exaggeration of what can happen. But I think that at the root of it, right? Like that's kind of what we need to understand is that the machine is giving us information back based on its understanding. It can't distinguish between causation and correlation.
So I had a very interesting example of this where I started using Gemini. It was recommended to me to use it for research, to find studies. And so I was preparing for a podcast and I asked Gemini to find me studies on a particular subject. And it came up with this list of references. I was like, oh my God, those are amazing. And there was one study that was just spot on what I was looking for. So I went to PubMed to try to find the study and I couldn't find it. So I went back to Gemini and put in the title of the study it had just given me and said, please find this study and give me the link. And then it replies, this study doesn't exist.
Right.
And so I said, but you just gave me that reference. Why would you give me a reference that doesn't exist? And its reply was literally, oh yeah, that was my bad. Would you like me to stop giving you fake studies in the future?
Yeah. And the reality is like the way generative AI works at its core is, again, going back to probabilities. So you ask it a series of questions. The more data you provide it, the more context it has to work from. And what it does is it says, based on this set of input, what is the response? And then what are the associated words for this kind of query and question? And so it's not necessarily reasoning on its own. It is finding all of the relevant information to be able to provide an answer back. And it's great information. And that's where I think you as the expert really are able to discern that this is something real and this is something that is not. And that's where I think where we are now, and it'll continue to get better, right? Like there's no question about it that it is going to continue to provide those sources, to be more clear, to be more understanding, and to provide better information. It's not to say that the information that it provides in many cases is really great today, but it's still a tool that I think is really for the expert. You know, as an example, in radiology, machine learning has been used for years in AI, and it's to help the radiologist diagnose the x-rays. But you don't go into your hospital today and be handed an AI printout of like what the information is and say, go on with your day, right? Like you still need that human to be able to understand the contents of that information and say, yes, this is good, or no, it made a mistake, right? At the end of the day, we're all imperfect and unpredictable. And so we can't expect the information that is coming from a machine to also be perfect. But on the flip side, there's plenty of cases where I've used Gen AI to really find interesting information to think about. Like yesterday, I was looking at what is the optimal placing plan to go up Flagstaff. And it provided an answer back with regard to how to pace the initial part of the climb, the midsection, and then the latter sections against that. And then I asked it some questions like, why is it the optimal pacing? And it provided a rationale with regard to why that would be. And it said, here's also some different ways that you can pace it. And so here's a steady state pace the whole way up. And then also here's what most people do, which is overshoot the beginning when you're going up the steep section in the beginning past Gregory Canyon, and then you kind of fade through the rest of it. And then it provided an approximation of what it thought those different durations might be based on a person of a certain weight and a certain threshold. And then also some like physics characteristics around like CDA and what have you. So it's really interesting, right? Because it's like, that's an input that I haven't gone and verified it though, to say like, oh yeah, this does work, but it does provide some like interesting things to think about that I may not have thought of otherwise.
And that to me is one of the interesting things about the responses that you get can have mistakes, inaccuracies, and so forth. But if you're not expert enough to spot them, then you just accept what you're given.
Right.
Your instance, Trevor, is not the greatest example because you went and said, I want to find this. I want to read the actual study. I don't want just the title. But say you were, I got to put together a bibliography for this because I need to turn this term paper in and I need to show all my work. And you're like, hey, generate a bibliography for me. And it creates a bunch of fictional references. It sounds great, but until you verify that, you don't actually know that it's right.
Right,
you know?
Right. One thing that I think, especially amongst this group, we sometimes take for granted is how much we know at this point. And I think that is where a new person coming into training, into cycling, into endurance sport, it's an overwhelming experience to begin with. And at this point, we're also like overloaded with so much information from so many sources and so many differing opinions that it's then hard to distill it in terms of like, how do I move forward? It's almost paralyzing at that point too. So I think that an important piece here is, what is it that we're trying to understand? What is it that we're getting out of it? What are our goals? And from where are we coming to it from? right? So I think as a group of people who geek out on this stuff a lot, it's super fascinating to interact with. It's super fascinating to see what it comes back with. But really what it's doing in a lot of ways is spurring ideas.
So that kind of brings us back to how this is involved with the training software. And I read a very interesting article getting ready for this that kind of said that, which is coaches and athletes have gotten very data obsessed now. And the problem we have is there's so much data. It is very hard for a coach to process that data. That's not what we're built for. Same thing for an athlete.
True.
You know, it can get tiring going through 300 different graphs of different things and trying to say, what do they all mean? I think that's where the AI can be very helpful. But what it lacks that we're talking about here is judgment. It can give you interpretation. It can process all the data. It can find the trends. But it doesn't have that judgment to say, what does this mean? And have the experience to say, yeah, no, I get what's going on with this athlete, or I get what's going on with you as an individual. And that's what we still need to do.
Yeah. And that's not unique to coaching and endurance sport. I mean, that's really true across all domains and disciplines. As I mentioned, I've been working in big data and machine learning for years. And the reality is that it can do a really good job at predicting things. The incremental performance in some cases is marginal, but it can mean a lot depending on the context, right? Like at the world tour level, a 1% difference is massive. However, at the age group level, there's probably a lot of things that I can be doing first to get my maximal gains before I'm worried about those things that are really at the elite level.
So that really brings us to one of the questions I asked you is, how good can the AI be at prediction? I've had this conversation with you. I've had this conversation with many people that right now we're in that phase of interpretation and analysis. But the ultimate goal is prediction, to be able to look at all the data and say, here's where we think the athlete will be in a month. If we throw this particular type of workout at this athlete, that's going to get them on top form for their race. It's predicting the future. How good do you think AI is at taking that data and being predictive?
So that's an interesting question because in a lot of the reading, research, discussions I have had as well, when you try to apply things at a group level, there's so much variation in terms of an individual response. And how do you then cluster and cohort those groups of people relative to one another? That I think those predictions are plausible, but they're going to, again, be imperfect, right? So how much can you increase someone's threshold power up a climb within a given period of time? I think there are certainly models and predictions that can inform that. The area where you have to be careful is that, again, it's not going to be 100% accurate. It's going to be directional and provide a target for someone. And a number of things have to go to plan to be able to have that play out. The question that I'm not sure of is how much more lift do you get in terms of that AI prediction versus what we have seen with regard to some traditional methods and existing metrics that are in place today to compare those two things. And I'm not aware of any studies that have really gone into that to say, like, what is the comparison between an AI-driven, like at that top level of performance prediction relative to the coach-prescribed one. Now, there's an argument to be made there of like combining the two together again, which is where that expert and that data continues to help inform. And it's how do I get to quicker decision-making, right? Like at the end of the day, it's no different than saying, what I want to know is how to multiply these two numbers together and what the value is, not to do the math myself on a sheet of paper in my head, right? Like I want to get to the answers very quickly. And that's where technology is certainly going to continue to help and accelerate us.
So I'm going to throw this at you as a bit of a challenge at you. I wanted to give AI actually its own opportunity to get into this conversation and potentially defend itself. So I did go to Gemini and asked it the question about what is the impact of AI on training platform software? And it wrote a very long report to me that I should send to you because it was very interesting. It was written by AI, so take it with a grain of salt. But first of all, it said training platforms or training software is really being defined by two platforms, TrainingPeaks and Strava. So there was a compliment to you. But then it got a little mean towards you. And what it said is, your platform is based on concepts of Bannister and Coggin. So Bannister's impulse response, which is basically the basis of the PMC. And it said, actually, there's no research basis to show that those work and are effective. And said, it's static. And the training platforms are a little too static, and AI is going to allow us to have a much more dynamic experience for the athlete where it can modify day to day, which I found an interesting flip, because that's always been my criticism, where coaches are essential is coaches are the ones that can be dynamic.
Yep.
Now here's the AI going, no. Coaches and the training platforms are static. You're only going to get dynamic if you use us. So it was certainly being very strong in defending itself.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, I think that there's always nuance. This is not an either or conversation. It's not a zero-sum game. And I think that sometimes we talk about these things in being a very binary decision of, do I use this? Do I not use this? And so from my perspective, it's like it adds value. The question is, though, and sometimes is that adaptation, that adaptive plan, being an age group athlete who has worked with a coach and worked on my own, when do you actually need to continue to push through? When should you be doing it regardless of how you feel? Does it have the context and the information to be able to do that accurately? Does it know you and what you're capable of? Is it intentionally trying to push you because it wants to see what those limits are, right? Like one of the things that has always been so fascinating about training, why I think so many people gravitate towards it, is number one, you feel alive, right? And part of that human experience is, what am I capable of? And you have different personalities and different people go through this differently. And some you have are that like, I actually just go too hard all the time. And then there's other folks that, they're not sure what they're capable of. And so they might hedge towards being more conservative. And then you have folks in the middle, right? Like you have that broad spectrum. And I'm not saying any of them are more right or wrong, right? Like there's no judgment in that. I think it's just like we all have our own human experience. And I think what's challenging sometimes is to rely on data coming in to just tell me how I'm supposed to feel. One of the things that I have actually always loved about training, why I keep going at this, is it's just helped me understand myself more and more. And so if AI can help do that, if that's part of the conversation within there, and I'm not second guessing myself around that every single time like a change occurs, I think that's awesome. I think that you have to have correct data going in to be able to make those decisions appropriately. You have to have a tremendous amount of self-awareness to be able to make those decisions. And at the end of the day, too, like every coach I've spoken with, every expert I hear from, at the end of the day, it still comes down to like, how do you feel, right? Like, how are you thinking about this right now? How motivated are you? The coaches that I speak with, it's interesting, they'll collect a lot of these metrics, but they still use that acute training load and that chronic training load to be able to understand those ramp rates and the decision-making within that. And it helps provide context against everything. But it also comes down to the athlete and how they're feeling. I can tell you that, even personally, working with a coach, we didn't do that much testing because it was used as a guiding post. And if I overshot my intervals because I was feeling great that day, but I still completed them and they were consistent, that was what mattered. So you can kind of know those differences, but it can be very confusing. And if a plan is constantly changing on you and you're not understanding exactly why and what it means, you can shortchange yourself and you're potentially not even getting the opportunity to learn and see what you're capable of. And so there's that balance there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to bring that up because I think a lot of us see the ultimate goal here is to have that extremely dynamic plan where literally every single day we're deciding what do you do that day based on how you're feeling, how you've been responding to training and everything else. But I'll actually back up a little bit and say there is a real value to having a long-term plan that the athlete is aware of and making sure that while you're adjusting day to day, if they're feeling off or whatever, you make those adjustments, they're also sticking to a plan as opposed to every day not knowing what they're going to do the next day until that day comes around.
I kind of want to go back to when you're talking about the response that you received from Gemini. My question is, what's the source? Where is it pulling that information from? Is it inspecting how TrainingPeaks actually works and making a judgment on how it works? Or is it reading the internet, reading reviews of that product and saying, it's static because DC Rainmaker said at some point it's static and blah, blah, blah. So then you responded, Lee, about how it's about the data that goes in and how, that has to be good for AI to spit out good data in a simplified sense. So my question is, If you're integrating AI technology into TrainingPeaks, what is the source of information that it's using about a particular athlete? Is it their data? Is it trends that you're seeing in all of the data that's ever been uploaded to TrainingPeaks? How are you making sure that the data that it's using to predict what that athlete should do next is quote unquote as clean as possible?
So I think at the end of the day, we need to be thinking about motivations, right? Like AI is very popular right now. And so you see this race of hype around like, how can I sell this? There's so many technology companies invested here. There's so much opportunity invested here. We saw that with the internet. I saw a video pop up the other day, and it was the 1983 video game crash that occurred, where there was so much hype around video games, and it was flooded in the market because everyone saw this like cash grab. And then obviously like video games are a huge industry today. So there's tremendous value there. And I feel like that is some of where we are today. I think when you think about TrainingPeaks too as a product, it's for the people that love to really like dig into this stuff and to learn and to understand what is the science of training. And so we need to be thoughtful around that because I don't want to take that away. You know, at the end of the day, we're also like 100% supportive of coaching and the human coach, the human relationship, and everything that comes along with it. It has changed my life. I see it change countless lives on a daily basis. It makes it a wonderful experience. What I don't love is this conversation of it's either AI or it's a human coach versus how do you leverage AI to improve the coaching experience to be able to focus on the things that matter more than the things that don't. When it comes to some of the modeling, I would say that a lot of the high value features that are AI driven exist in WKO today. And a lot of those features, we are talking about bringing them into TrainingPeaks. So your time to exhaustion, your VO2 max, your modeled FTP, your FRC, right? Like how can those things help, again, further inform that training? And that's also a big part of what makes it special. And so for me, I want to ensure that we preserve that. And so what we will always do is help inform. We will help to understand, but the essence of what is that coach-athlete relationship, what it means to get expert instructions. There's so many coaches out there that have podcasts, that have content, that share their information. We want to continue to support that because that's what makes this whole industry better. And so to your point on like, where is that source of data coming from? It's coming from all those articles that have been written over the years by all of those coaches that are out there. And so we want to make sure that we continue to support that as an ecosystem, as a culture, as an industry. I mean, you guys correct me, but I don't know of an athlete, especially at the top level, that has succeeded without the support of a team and a coach. So I don't have an exact answer for you, but like the last thing I want to do and the last thing I think is a viable thing to do, the last thing that I think is good for anyone is to say, how do we just take this data and just apply it everywhere? Like I think it's just not going to create an experience for anyone that is going to stand the test of time, that is going to be good for the culture of sport and good for people.
This is a good place to hear from pro rider Jack Burke, who talks about the importance of the human connection in training.
For people that, let's say, if they're using a training software and they're mostly relying on that, if you don't have access to hire a coach, like if you just can't afford it or something like that, or you don't have access to a good coach, I would say instead shift to building a good team of mentors. Like reach out to people who have been where you want to go. Like for me, it was I just accepted when they talk, I shut up and listen because like they've been where I want to go and I will listen to these people. And I think that's important because if you're coaching yourself and you're using all these tools, yes, you can have all this great data, but you will have some blind spots as far as things you're not thinking of. And it's good to have that external perspective. Of course, having a coach is the best option, but if you don't have access to a coach, a really good skill is learning how to reach out to mentors and learning how to ask intelligent questions and be respectful of their time. And be respectful means short, concise, specific question, not vague, like ask them something you can't Google. Learning how to ask good questions, you will get the best information from some of the best riders and coaches in the world that way, if you know how to ask well. That's probably, let's call it like the best like sort of free solution if you're just relying on training softwares and stuff. But I mean, you can do a really good job self-coaching yourself, but I do think no matter how good these tools get, you do need that human connection. And especially when you're starting, because when you're just started like learning how to understand this stuff, you need someone to teach you how to use the tools. When you get later in your career and you've been coached for a while, you sort of know a lot of things. It's still really valuable to have a coach. I mean, for me, it was just to keep me from overdoing it, or just like it gave me so much bandwidth that I didn't have to think about my training. That was one of the best things about working with Steve. I never thought about my training until I was putting my shoes on. I just look at whatever he gave me and I just do that, versus in the past, I'd be constantly thinking about about it, and I always got to do more, and I'd be focusing on the wrong things, and I wouldn't focus on my weaknesses as much because I just didn't realize them.
I love that you brought up the video game crash in 1983, because a couple of weeks ago I was out for a ride. The podcast I normally listen to had gotten through all of them. I'm in the middle of a climb, and this podcast comes on about the Atari video game. And I'm like, this is stupid. As soon as I get to the top of the climb, I'm going to switch. By the top of the climb, I was fascinated because apparently this game caused the entire crash in 83 because they put so much money into it and it was such a big flop.
Yep. It was very rushed. If I'm not mistaken, I believe there is a landfill in New Mexico. I think there was a Netflix show about them going to find that, right?
Yep.
So
with the ET game. So yeah, I never knew about any of that. Yeah.
I lived it firsthand.
What's the relationship to a landfill?
They had so many games that they just never sold that they buried them all. Yeah.
The short version is Atari had this game developer who was apparently amazing, had developed these huge games. And then Steven Spielberg came to them and said, can you develop an ET game? And they needed it in like 6 months. And typical game development then was like a year or two. And this guy's like, yeah, I can do it. And I want no help. I'm going to do it all by myself. And he basically locked himself in his house or whatever and just worked 12 hours a day to come up with this game. And it was not a great game. It's the short. Like they said, it's not the worst game ever, but it was not a great game. But it got really hyped. And every kid got it for Christmas. And we're just kind of meh.
Yeah.
That there was a lull in the home video game system because of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So Nintendo, right? Like when they brought back out the first Nintendo Entertainment System, that's where it started to come back.
Yep.
And when they designed that for the American market, one of the things they did, they had a top-loading cartridge tray that pushed down because they wanted it to look more like a VCR as opposed to a video game system, pushing cartridge. And they also sold it with Robbie the robot because they wanted it to be more of a learning system. And so they really took this conservative approach of like, how do we, show the value of this? But then we all bought Super Mario Brothers and it was all history from there.
Healthy eating can be a challenge. Sports nutrition is all about knowing what to eat, when, how much, and avoiding temptations that can derail your plans. I'm Jared Berg, and I'm a registered dietitian and exercise physiologist with Fast Talk Labs. I've created a new 8-week sports nutrition course to help you break old habits and establish healthier, high-performance fueling practices for years to come. Learn more and get started on fasttalklabs.com. Look for athlete services and sports nutrition.
Going back to our conversation, I was really glad that you guys just had that discussion because the last thing I'll bring up here after that AI response absolutely attacked TrainingPeaks and Strava, it then actually showed some humility and it got into that predictive ability and said the one issue here, which I agree with 100%, is there's very little research on the long-term effects of training.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a weakness that most of the research has been done in the lab, not out in the field. And out in the field can be very different from the lab. And so it said itself, AI's ability to predict is limited because we don't have that data and we need to rely on experience, coach experience. Yep. So it even said that.
Yeah. And to make it fun. To your point on the lab, like that actually reminded me of, you've shared this a couple of times. And one of them that I looked up was you were in Ithaca, right? And I believe your coach was a physiologist.
Yes.
And there were two stories. One was you had this like 2-hour or 4-hour ride to do, and it was like snowing outside, and you just said, I'm going to go outside.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day,
that much.
Right. And then also like, you'll have to fill in the gaps here, but I seem to recall something about, it was like very disciplined workouts where it was like robotic in nature in terms of what was prescribed.
So this is where I went, I think I need to change coaches.
Yeah.
Because we had a weekly time trial. And a guy who's won the national time trial championships twice was showing up, Glenn Swan, every week. And so I had an opportunity to go and race somebody that strong. And so as a coach myself, I would go, if anybody said, I'm trying to build for time trials and we have this on a Thursday night, I'd be, absolutely, we are building that into your plan. Go and do that. My coach didn't want me doing that because there were hills on the course and that would mess up the data. So he instead wanted me on Thursday nights to go and ride this road that was about 10 minutes. So he wanted me to go out and back and just keep doing laps on it because it was a perfectly flat road. So he'd get good data.
Yeah.
And that's where you're, to me, kind of missing the point.
Right. And honestly, like this is something that I think we've seen in the evolution of coaching and training, frankly, where looking at some of my old plans and working with a coach, a lot of it was, especially once you got to the summer, here's this group ride. Here's how I want you to ride this group ride. I want you to sit in. I want you to attack off the front. Like that incorporation of fun and experience, and also knowing that like some of the things that I really needed to work on were my pack dynamics and my confidence, frankly, right? Like I did a lot of the work. Now take these opportunities to really express all of the work that you've done in these fun environments. And I think that sometimes when we talk about structured training specifically, we have kind of conflated structured workouts with steps on them that are very rigid with structured training, which is having a goal and an intention and a purpose to drive towards an outcome. They're different.
How about we shift gears a little bit and let's look into the future. Use your crystal ball, if you will. You probably have a better sense of where your company is wanting to go and going, but let's talk more broadly about data integration, for instance, and what that looks like in the future.
Sure. There's always new sensors and devices. I think one of the things that has really been at the core of TrainingPeaks over the years, and you see it within the industry, is that it's an open ecosystem. So there's two parts to this. There's always new sensors and devices being developed. And so part of it is how do we ensure that we can get that into those experts' hands to understand the relationship of that data relative to other data that is well understood today. So Dr. Steven Seiler, who's been on your show a number of times, he's working with TimeWare, right? I've heard you all mention this. And so that is a strap that goes around your chest to understand respiration rate and the effects of that within your training. So that's a very interesting potential for that device. I believe it's even used by a Visma Lisa bike right now. At least we've seen it within the races. And how does that help inform training? And so on that open ecosystem and what is always being brought in, one of the things that we've really worked on in this last year is to say, how do we ensure that as these new devices are made available, typically the first place in which that device will be made available is within the head unit of the device, recorded within the fit file, and then brought into the platform. So what we wanted to do was make sure that it was a no-op effort to continually bring that data in, where previously we were stuck with static fields. Now, once that data is in there, we can start to understand the relationship of it. We can have those conversations with those coaches in terms of like, this is how we see being able to apply these metrics, right? Because to your point earlier, what we want to always do is make sure that we are listening and learning and understanding of what's out there, not necessarily dictating. And so like that's also one of the challenges with TrainingPeaks, which is both kind of like its strength and why it gets criticized so much, is because we want to be agnostic to a large extent. We want to be that place where training and science can continue to develop and we can continue to learn on what adds value and what doesn't. Then there's the other side of it. So there's a lot of recovery devices and wellness metrics, right? Like that are being utilized today. And it's interesting because again, I think that nothing has been that silver bullet that unlocks a new era of training. What it has done is help to inform and call out things. So taking HRV as an example, a lot of cases where I've heard from coaches that it's been really helpful is to help form habits, actually, right? Like what is the effect of alcohol on your recovery and within your training? And now provides an objective metric through which you can see that. On a day-to-day basis, I've heard from a number of coaches that say, yeah, it's interesting, but I'm not necessarily going to have it dictate what's going to occur today.
So we had Molly Brewer on the show earlier this year, and she had a really interesting study where they did a lot of interviews with coaches on data analysis. This is coaches in all fields. And something I really remember from that study is you had coaches that were they were seeing the value in some of these new devices, but they were taking the data from these devices. And in this day and age, they were still pulling that data back into an Excel sheet to do the analysis. And there were two reasons why. One was often these tools came with their own proprietary software, and that software didn't show the coaches what they wanted to see. So they wanted to pull it into Excel so they could do their own analysis. But the other thing was because it was all proprietary software, they couldn't take the data from this device, the data from that device, and compare them. So they had to pull it into an Excel sheet to do the comparison. So I'm interested in your response to this because on the one hand, she said, the coaches were saying, we want one platform where we can see all this data together. But at the same time, how do you address that challenge in the future of allowing the coaches to see the data the way they want to see it?
Yeah, I think that what you're talking about is having things curated in a way that is easily reviewed, processed, digested on one side. And then on the other side is ultimate flexibility of bringing together myriads of information that continue to evolve and adapt over time. So again, like we look to strike the balance to some extent, but we're not going to be perfect within that. Certainly there are a number of cases where we do have an API that is leveraged by certain organizations to be able to pull that data together for their needs.
And is this something where perhaps a platform like WKO allows a lot more of that flexibility to look at the data the way you want to see it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it does, right? Like because you have the ability to create expressions as metrics come in, you can build your own charts. And again, like what makes it so powerful is also what makes it a somewhat high barrier of entry for being able to use it, right? Like I watched your WKO video, which is fantastic, by the way, around like what are the charts that matter, being able to share them, being able to, again, build that community of science and culture around that as an analysis tool. But it's not the end all be all of like every possible metric that may come into existence over time. So again, it's so broad that it's hard to say like, here's the one solution to that. And I think that is a key point that we didn't touch on earlier is this space is continually rapidly changing, whether it's the data itself, whether it is the tools and the technology, whether it is, the AI. How do we make sure that we don't engineer ourselves into a corner such that it's really great in the moment and then we're stuck? Because that's what you see in a lot of technology companies over time. And I've seen that and I've had to unwind it and I've been a part of it. And it takes a very intentional approach of saying like, how are we developing the system to solve for those customer needs in a way that doesn't also like freeze us in time?
So there's certainly capability, but connecting it with something like WKO, right now you still have to code it yourself.
Yeah.
So if we get to this point where all the data is being pulled into one platform, are there things that we're going to be able to do that we can't do now? And also, are there dangers with that?
Very likely. The more data you bring together, the more potential there is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to separate potential from practical application. And even with more data, like more is not better. And I think that a lot of times we can create just more confusion in the process and more misunderstanding. Again, like even going back to what is available within a ChatGPT and all the sources that it's pulling from, there are things that conflict all the time. And there's also people that are very adamant about a position. And so it's very challenging to say that like this is the right thing to do. Even with HRV, right? Like different ways in which it's collected, right? Like there's some very strong opinions around like the exact mode and time and approach towards collecting that data. So now you collect that data and it's all been captured in different ways. And now you need to make sense of it. And one of the interesting things in working within the data space is that they talk about like 70% of the time plus is spent on data wrangling. So it's not about the modeling, it's not about the AI, it's not about the machine learning. It's about ensuring you have clean data that doesn't have bias within it, that is representative, and that provides a good sample size to be able to ascertain information from.
Here's Robbie Ventura on why he feels there's enormous benefits to integrating the data.
I think TrainingPeaks is at the cutting edge of that. Obviously, there's a lot of great stuff out there in terms of analyzing power output. I think the future is analyzing all these other metrics that we have now: weight, heart rate, HRV, temperature, respiration rate, adding all of those into the mix to help us really understand the cost of a given workout or the recovery the next day or the day after that. Those elements become super important as it relates to how much load someone can manage. I think that the recovery metrics, the sleep metrics are really going to impact training plan development in the future. And I also think there's got to be, to me, the metrics in ride also are going to evolve, like the Velocity platform. We have in-ride metrics that help people understand a little bit more about what's happening to them as they're actually riding. And I think to help quantify aerodynamics, for example, while you're riding, quantify movement while you're riding, those elements will also help guide us and allow us to use technology to better coach the athlete.
So again, going back to Molly's paper, I'll raise another issue that was quite surprising but interesting in that paper is that coaches said, when you bring all this data together, there are privacy issues. I can now tell when my athletes have gone out drinking. I can tell all these things about their private life that I shouldn't know from the data. And that's the other question. You bring all this data together, do you start getting into privacy concerns?
Well, there's inferences that are being made. So obviously, like if a coach is communicating that, or an athlete is communicating with that with their coach, they know those things. I think what is important is that there's always consent. And so when an athlete is establishing that relationship, they are forging an agreement with one another around that data and that system and that sharing of information, right? So an athlete has the ability to not provide that information because a lot of those things are not by default brought together. But it depends, again, are we talking about the age group or are we talking about where it's someone's job? And those considerations actually can vary greatly.
So another big trend that we are seeing in the training platforms and also with devices. So for example, I have the newest Garmin watch and it now gives me a morning and evening report. Is this assessment? This whole idea that you can now go to the platform or go to your watch or go to whatever in the morning and it will say, here's how recovered you are. Here's how you slept. Here's where you're at with your training status. And then often give you recommendations. So for example, my watch this morning said, you've really been beating yourself up. Your training readiness, it gave me a score of 10 out of 100. It said, you need to rest today.
Okay.
And admittedly, I got to the office this morning and went, yeah, it was right.
What is your experience with that, generally speaking?
So this is the conversation I want to have. And what I will say is, if you had asked me that question 6 years ago, I would say, I take it with a giant grain of salt. I would get these assessments and just go, no, I get why it came up with that conclusion, but it's just not right. And I'm not going to change my training based on it. In the last year, I would say the assessments I'm getting, I have been shocked how often I initially wake up, look at the assessment, go, I don't agree. And then 2 hours later going, yeah, the watch was right. So I think they are getting better, but I'm still not at the point where I'm saying, I'm going to trust it over my own judgment. And that's kind of the question I wanted to throw to you is, can we get to that point? And is there a point where these tools could actually do a better job than a coach or the athlete and saying, here's where you're at?
That is an unknown in the sense of, like, I can't predict how well someone knows someone else and what they know about them. I can't predict how someone knows themselves. And I think there's a concern I would have. Like, I think it's always great to take an input and to help use it as a tool to self-reflect. But I think there's also danger in relying on someone else at the end of the day to tell you how you feel. Someone can pat you on the back, someone can provide guidance, someone can provide that input and say, you really need to take a rest, right? Like there's obviously extremes within that, but I think it's still so important for an athlete also to use that input and say, yeah, like you just said, you're right. You know what? I'm actually going to just test it out here today and see how I feel. And I think you also touched on a very important point here is that these things have been around for a while and they are continuing to get better and they will continue to get better. I mean, that is just progression of society, right? Like everything that we have around us, we do not live the same existence that we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, but we've continued to adapt. And I think what's important within that too is that there are still like certain fundamentals that continue to exist and will always continue to exist. Side thing I thought was pretty interesting was I think I was watching CBS Sunday Morning a few weeks back, and they were talking about the resurgence of malls, right? Like people are going back to malls again, and we had to go for back to school. And I was surprised to go in and it was like packed because people want to be together. And when you talk about motives and direction and what is someone's angle of pushing something forward, think about during the COVID era. What you heard from, especially from the investment community, from the technology community was, we have jumped ahead 10 years, 5 to 10 years with regard to how society is going to be. We are all remote first. Like we have no need to go outside anymore and connect with one another. Like this is a permanent change that has just been brought forward. And the three of us are sitting here in the same room now because the conversation is just that much better.
Yes. I feel like I'm a little ahead of people on this because I worked from home for so many years as a coach. And I still remember I think it was 2016, I literally one morning just said, I can't do this anymore. I walked half a mile down the road to a Regis office, walked in and like rent me a desk.
Yep.
And it was worth every penny.
Yeah.
That being somewhere else, being around people, it's great working from home for a few years, but there's a point where you go, I can't do this anymore. I need to be around people.
Oh, absolutely. One of the first events after the pandemic I did was the Firecracker in 2021. And they have that parade that goes out of town before you start the race. And I can just tell you, like, the emotion that everyone had. There was so much gratitude that we're all together again. We could experience things together. Like, there's just nothing better. And so, I know we're talking a lot about technology and a lot of the advancements, but like, there's still like these fundamentals that I think are so important to not forget about and not just say like, oh, we have technology now. We no longer need these other things. I think, again, it's not an either or conversation.
So keeping that in mind, what would you like to see in the future with these assessments? How do they best balance that human side with giving you information that you might not be able to glean about yourself?
Well, I think it's that combination of subjective and objective information brought together. And then also, this is another area where AI can and will help. This is something that we've talked about internally. I think Grant talked about it the other week when I was listening to the show around like the mood of someone, right? Like it comes through in the contents in those conversations. So you have your objective metrics with regard to your HRV and your sleep, and then you're seeing someone being short with you, right? Like those two things together are a very strong signal there's something going on. Now, does that mean that you should stop doing what you're doing? I don't know. It's probably an opening of a door to a conversation of what's going on. Right? Because again, like in that coach-athlete relationship, and I think that this gets lost sometimes, it's just like anyone that works together, right? Like you guys are colleagues, but you care for one another, right? Like people care for one another and coaches care for their athletes tremendously. And I think that gets lost sometimes. And so, yes, there's a piece of it where it's about performance and about improvement, but there's a genuine caring for one another in terms of what's going on. And I can think back to certain things that I was going through and a coach seeing it kind of show up, right? Like, what's going on? You're not thinking like a winner. You seem stressed. And being able to have someone objectively look at that and wake me up a little bit, it was so valuable. And I think there's so much to that.
Fantastic.
Trevor, can I put you on the spot and ask you, as a user of many devices, you're kind of a tech guy. You like to try stuff out. You give it the full shot. You give it some time. You know that they evolve over time and progress over time. What would you like to see further integrated into Lee's product that would help you make decisions about whether you're ready to go or not?
I think it's similar to what you are saying, which is right now it's just taking a bunch of data and then saying, here's where we think you're at. I think ultimately it should be a conversation with the athlete. Whether the AI can do this or not, I don't know. But where it can say, here's what I'm seeing in the data, and it can ask you questions. How are you feeling? Where do you think you're at? And then ultimately generate the report based on both your qualitative assessment along with the data that it brings. So it's a back and forth where it can say, well, you're saying you're feeling pretty good, but here's what I'm seeing in the data that's different. And it can point out when there's contradiction. It can point out when the data is backing what you're saying. And together you can come up with that assessment. Because I don't care how good these tools get, there will never be a point where just based on data, it's going to get the whole picture. And there has to be that athlete assessment. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to probabilities and outcomes, one of the things I think that makes human relationships so wonderful is that there can be conflict. Not everything is perfect all the time. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen with AI chatbots even today, right? Like you can quote unquote now have the perfect relationship. And I don't know that that necessarily helps us, right? Because I think that, again, what is so important for us as people is that things are going to go wrong. And do you have that person or people, that support system that can help you work through these things? That can help you show the things that you might be missing, the non-obvious things. And so the only way that that can be possible with AI is if it literally collects every single thing about you and all your thoughts. And then all of a sudden we're like in 1984, George Orwell, right?
Yep.
So,
well, I'll give you a bit of an example of all this that kind of pokes fun at me. We did that episode with Grant that you mentioned. We were talking about irritability. And, I gave the example of my girlfriend pointing out that I was being a grouch. So I'll give you another example. I was hanging out with her yesterday and she started singing this song to me about how she likes it when I'm not a grouch and I was a grouch on Saturday. And she likes me much better when I'm not one, which is why I woke up this morning thinking, oh, I'm great. And then, my watch says, no, you're not recovered at all. And then I remember her singing that song to me. I went, yeah, okay. It's right.
And I would say, I'm curious from your perspective, if you heard that from a machine that said you're being a grouch, how would you have felt about that relative to your girlfriend telling you you're being a grouch?
So can it sing as well as she can?
What I'm saying is that, did it mean more to you coming from her?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm getting at. And I think that's one of those things where you can't deny that hearing something from a computer, I can just ignore it.
I think that's true in 2025.
Yeah.
I think the sad part maybe, or just the natural progression is that we're all going to get more and more used to hearing feedback from machines that we actually say, oh, that's a valid point. Good point, machine, Mr. Machine or Mrs. Machine or whatever.
Sure.
And that will have some impact on us. Now it's a little easier to dismiss, and we can say our girlfriend is more important to us. Their words have more meaning than a machine, but maybe not always.
I fear the day where she starts singing to me about being a grouch. I'm like, no, you're wrong. The AI told me yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when the roles reverse. Dismissed.
I don't ever see that going well.
Not well.
Built for coaches from day one, TrainingPeaks is the complete coaching solution. For 25 years, TrainingPeaks has evolved with endurance sports, making the planning and analysis tools you love even better year after year. And it doesn't stop there. TrainingPeaks has added Strength Builder, TrainingPeaks Virtual, Fueling Insights, 46 new sports subtypes, payments, stacked charts, women's health metrics, and more. Ready to take your data deeper? For a limited time, get 20% off a TrainingPeaks premium subscription with code FASTTALK. That's code, all caps, FASTTALK for 20% off. So the last two trends that we've seen in the training platforms that I think we need to at least touch on are, one, this trend towards gamification and augmented reality. And I know you've now gotten into that game. And then the other one is bringing a lot of the social media features into the platforms. And Strava is obviously the best example of that, where in some ways I remember my brother saying, yeah, Strava is my social media platform. So what's your feeling on the future of both of these? Let's start with the gamification and where you feel that is going.
So it's interesting because, I was doing a bit of reading on this and just the notion of gamification, right? There's a lot of areas where gamification can be very helpful. It is used in therapy. There's opportunities to turn something from being just pure work into something that is more enjoyable. I think where you have to be careful about it, and we all have obligations, especially for me, right? As responsible on a platform, is when is gamification a reward system that is positive? And when does it become manipulation? And I think that we all have a responsibility within that as we develop our products to ensure that we do it with an amount of integrity within there. We're not always going to get it right. We aren't perfect. Sometimes we're going to get things wrong, but it is, how do you just make that experience more fun? Sometimes that distraction, right? As you were saying, going back and forth on the road to just do those same intervals because the data was steady is not the thing that is going to get the best out of you. Sometimes you just need to switch your brain off and you think about something else. That's why we all love group rides, right? I don't worry about the power. I'm just thinking about the wheel in front of me. And I think augmented reality and virtual platforms do a great job of creating that experience where you're riding along and next thing you forget anything that you're thinking about and you're just focused on that group and how to operate within the platform. I think where we need to be careful, because this has been seen within social media studies, of the mental impact, the negative mental impact, especially on youth around that. And so I think it's important for us to be able to understand what our relationship is. And frankly, this applies to the whole conversation. Just because data is something that's seen as purely objective for us or for a group of people does not mean that's how it works for everyone. There's many cases where there's negative impacts around, even with HRV or step counters. They did a study where it was the number of steps that people were walking were either overestimated, accurate, or underestimated. And the group where the steps were underestimated, so they were supposed to be walking 1,000 steps and they were told they walked 500, it actually led towards poor eating behavior, negative thinking, right? So it's you have to be careful around how these systems are put together, how you look at them. I think that, social media is great when you can approach it. I like seeing it to where it's like, this was a great ride. I love those pictures, right? Like seeing our friends and people that we know get to live their best lives and to peek a window into it, I think that is awesome. On the flip side, I think that when you compare yourself to that and it starts to become something where I didn't get to do that, or I'm not as able to do that thing, it can just have negative consequences. And it's a understandable thing, right? Like I felt that, right? Like I can't say that I've never looked at someone's great ride or someone's power output and been like, man, I wish I couldn't do that, right? Like, of course I have.
And that's one of the concerns, is particularly when you have these segments where you are being ranked, you're being compared to everybody else. And sometimes that can be hard on people.
It can, absolutely. And I think, that really comes through too when we compete, right? Like when you go and do a race, you get a placing. I think that if you focus too much on those placings, personally, it can take away the joy from the experience. I think that's one of the areas where gravel has really kind of taken off, is because we are just put all together and it's about like my own personal best, and I can have a great race regardless of where I end up, and I will connect with a group of people and it'll be fun. To counteract that, right? Like I've been spat out the back of a road race in the middle of nowhere and it's not as fun.
No. And I do think an important thing to point out here is we all know how negative the big social media platforms can get, where you just post one thing and all of a sudden everybody's telling you you're Satan and the worst person on the face of the planet.
Has that happened to you, Trevor? What did you say?
Close. I think I described what I had for lunch that day. I will say, I've been on Strava for a long time. I've never gotten a negative comment. I have noticed that as a social media platform, it tends to be a lot more encouraging, which is probably a positive, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's certainly positive experiences, right? Like in being able to just be happy for each other, right? Like I think that's kind of what it comes down to. If that's the experience that you get and you have your own experience and you can enjoy those and you can keep those separate and enjoy the experiences of others, it can be a wonderful technology and tool to bring people together. If that is difficult for a person, then it may not be that same experience, right? Like we don't all have those same experiences. And I think that's the challenging part, is that like these are platforms used by many people and we all have different ways in which we navigate them.
So the question I really wanted to ask you, because this must be something that you're talking about since you're doing it, but up until now, there has been a separation of the gaming training platforms, your kind of Zwift, RGT, Ruby, KinoMap, and the training platforms like TrainingPeaks. Where do you see this going when the two are merged?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, where we started, some of this too is kind of important. And again, we've grown with the technology and we've grown with how cycling and coaching has evolved over time. As a new person coming into the ecosystem and working with a coach or getting a training plan, it's very overwhelming, right? Like you need to get a device, you need to get a bike, you need to get a trainer, you need to connect all these things. You have different accounts. What is OAuth and like what am I granting permissions to? And I saw it firsthand. And it was kind of like a moment for me where I was just like, wow, we take for granted just how much we have evolved with this industry. So really what we wanted to make sure is like, how can we continue to just smooth that experience of people coming into the sport of cycling, right? Like, again, going back to all the devices and all the things we've been talking about, I need to measure how many things and what things just to ride a bike and ride faster. Like, is that the best thing for us? It's super cool. And I love to geek out on the data. And I think that testing out new technologies and how your body interacts, right? Like we're all kind of like our own little science experiment in this process of like, how can I continue to perform better? What works for me? What doesn't? What are my breaking points? But that's after you've been doing it for a while and you're already hooked. I think there's a part of, how do we make sure that people want to be doing this to start? And so how can we make that more approachable? So that was one piece of it. The other piece of it is that many coaches want to engage with their athletes. And again, even though we talk about like the human interaction, there's also something wonderful about FaceTime and Zoom and being able to connect online. And we do it all the time, right? Like day in and day out. There's so much convenience to it and we can still have fun and build relationships doing that. And again, for our support of the coach and for the credibility of the experience, what we wanted to make sure of is how can we make sure that like that real world to virtual world starts to feel a bit more seamless? There's kind of two aspects of it. There's the training, the community, the events that like any coach, any person can actually go do and bring together. And then there is the credibility of the experience overall. And how can we make sure that for our customers, we're helping them prepare for largely what they are doing, which is some sort of like either they're serious about their virtual racing, which is kind of ties into some of the physics within the platform, or they're preparing for some sort of real world experience. And so how can we make sure that those two things as closely match as possible, such that you have real world feel, real world look, as well as now we're introducing real world routes, right? So that is one of the things that we're trying to make sure of is like, how can we just best prepare people for it? Equally, we want to make sure that we have an open ecosystem, right? So we want to make sure that if that's not the platform for you, great. But we want to make sure that that is an option for you. And we're going to do our best to make sure that that is a compelling experience. We want to make sure that you can do your strength training, do any outdoor activity that you want to do, as well as support your indoor training, right? Like those are those three big areas of training that we want to be able to make sure that our athletes can do.
As Lee points out, there are many ways that virtual platforms can be used. Here's Matt Sharp talking about the ways that he and his coach have taken advantage of them.
My coach, Lance Watson, and through his company, Life Sport, I think they were one of the pioneers in online coaching. And so, yeah, he does an incredible job of obviously just checking in on me and using that kind of tech. With Life Sport, they do a lot of training sessions with spins and whatnot online, of course, which, yeah, helps build community. It's fun to pop into those every once in a while and check in with other athletes and kind of, yeah, feel like the team atmosphere. And, you know, it's funny, actually, I think about some of the stuff we did when he wasn't with me during my Olympic build. For a couple of training sessions on the track, actually, we actually set up a tripod, you know, with my phone. I think we did like a Zoom call or set up a Zoom call or something. So I was doing these intervals on the track and basically he could watch me for the most part as I was going around. And I actually had like my AirPod in when I was running. So he was giving me feedback as I was doing these training sessions. So I think that was to me, that was pretty innovative. I mean, he physically wasn't in, I think I was in Arizona at the time. He was in Canada. And so, but he was kind of on deck coaching me, which was pretty special for sure. It was funny though, because at the far end of the track, he'd kind of go radio silent because the Bluetooth didn't reach that far. But, you know, he'd pop in, you know, on the other side of the track or whatever. And it was kind of funny at the same time too. But yeah, definitely a great way to use technology and leverage it.
You know, I know we're talking about the virtual and the social part of it, but, you know, you and I have chatted too, to where I think there's so much to training that is more than just always being on the bike. I'm always fascinated by Leadville every year, and one particular athlete, right? Like we have the best mountain bike cyclists, especially within the US, compete every single year. And I think we're all somewhat fascinated by John Gaston, right? Lives up in Aspen, from the East Coast, I believe like Connecticut, New England area, comes out here as schemo racer, professional schemo racer, right? Looking to hopefully qualify for the Olympics. I know they have a competition here soon to determine that. But then does 2 mountain bike races a year. He does Aspen, and then he comes to Leadville, and he comes in on the podium. This year he was second, right? Like he was 6 hours and like 52 seconds, I think. There's a question of, to me, would he be better if he was on the bike all the time? Or is he as great as he is competing in that race because he's not on the bike all the time? And I would kind of like pose that question back to you in terms of like, how do you see coaching, athletic development, and performance as it relates to other sports contributing to your overall ability on a bike?
Oh, that's a good question. I love that question. I am a very big believer that if all you're ever doing is being on the bike or whatever your sport is, if all you're ever doing is that sport, you're eventually going to get in trouble. I do think cross-training, no matter what level athlete you are, is really important. After that, I would say I think there is big individual difference. I think there are some people that absolutely, like I coach one athlete, he loves the bike. And I've tried every offseason to get him out running. And he's like, I hate running. I love the bike. So he we'll do something different with the bike, but he wants to be on the bike. Where there are other athletes that I think if they did that much of a single sport, the example you just gave is probably a case of that, they probably wouldn't be as good. It would just mentally cook them on the sport and they'd be less interested. Where doing that big variety is actually what makes them stronger. I think that's a very individual thing.
Right.
So is that how you feel, or what's your...
I think it's all individualistic in that respect. It is what gets you excited and up in the morning. Yep. And knowing, again, yourself. I think your athlete that loves to be on the bike all the time is a great example of that. I've done all these things. That's not what I enjoy. Like being on the bike is what I live for. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think on the flip side, experimenting with that and knowing that is that thing and kind of like disqualifying those other options is also great.
Yeah.
So
I would say there, I think you brought up a good point. Self-awareness is really key. When I talked to him about that, he had a really good answer that I agree 100% with that. I'm not going to argue with you on getting you off the bike, because he's a CEO of a company and he goes, look, I have a stressful job. I'm never going to be a professional cyclist. Cycling has always been my stress relief, my fun. So I get with professional athletes, they need to have that off season. But when you tell me in the off season, I have to stop doing the thing that is my break from what is stressful, I don't like that. I want to be doing the thing I enjoy. And I went, that makes a ton of sense. That's how you look at cycling. It is your break. It is your rest. It is what fills you back up mentally.
Right.
So let's keep you on the bike all year round.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, Lee, we've actually gone a little overtime here, but has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And I know it's a conversation that's going to happen again and again, because it's all about where are we going. And I think the answers to all this in a year and 5 years and 10 years are going to be different. But great to have that check-in and hear what you're thinking right now. So before we dive into our take-homes, we do have a question for the forum, and it's really to all of our listeners just to continue this conversation. So just a very broad one. What trends would you like to see in the training platforms in the future? Would love to hear your responses, love to hear what you'd like to see. And with that, Lee, I know this is the first time on the show, but you're a listener, so you know how we finish up. You've got 1 minute to tell us what you think is the most important thing for listeners to take from this episode. And do you want to go first or do you want to finish us out?
I'll go first.
Okay. Floor is yours.
Thank you. What I would say in this whole conversation, what matters the most, regardless of what platform you want to use, whether you're self-coached, whether you want to use an AI platform, whether you want to work with a coach, I think is that the more people that we have in our sport, the more people that enjoy life, the more people that feel like they are bringing out their best selves, everything is going to, fall after that. And I think that, all the technology, all of the tools, all of the capabilities can help enhance that experience. And it's not a one size fits all for every person. We obviously have a particular perspective on what matters there, but just as you mentioned, your athlete that really wants to be on the bike, that's what works for him. And that's great. And other athletes, they need that downtime. Other athletes have the need for additional support. And other athletes just really enjoy doing this on their own and connecting with others. And I think that all of that is wonderful. And I think we should just be grateful that we all get to do this with our time. And I would just like to thank your listeners for listening to our conversation today. And thank you both for the time.
Absolutely.
Very kind of you to say. You're the first person to ever thank the listeners at the end. I appreciate that. Chris?
Ooh. What I would take from this conversation is that we're in a really interesting time to be an athlete, to be a coach, and to be in the industry supporting athletes and coaches, because things are changing rapidly, or seem to be. There's the potential for them to change very rapidly, but I think what we all have to keep in mind, both as users and as creators of products, is that it's not always the best to jump onto trends. It's not always the most beneficial to just give in to the machines in a way. Like, it takes a intelligent person to be discerning and make the right decisions about themselves as an athlete, or if you're a coach, to make the decisions about the athletes you're working with, because it comes down to individuals, and everybody's different, and everybody has different interests, motivations, and desires. And so it's great that we're talking about all of these things, because it will change, but it doesn't have to be considered a bad thing. It doesn't even have to be considered a good thing. It comes down to you, whether you want to use these new tools or not.
So I remember back 2004, 2005, I had just bought my first power meter. And in order to look at any of my data, and I think this is also back WKO1, I had to take my heart rate data and my power meter data, put it into an Excel sheet, and then line them up in the Excel sheet, export it to, I think, a GPX file at the time, myself to pull it in, and then have very rudimentary analysis of the data. So thinking about that compared to where we are now, it is light years difference. And I do think they're accurate in saying the big trend that we just went through was that data integration and that ability to pull in a bunch of different data fairly easily and look at it all together. Right before this episode, Chris, you said we're kind of doing another episode on AI. We talked about this. And part of that's because right now, when you're talking about where is all this going, AI is part of every little bit of that. I think that is the new trend. And I get that people are scared of it. I would say it has some amazing capabilities, but it also has some major flaws. So I don't think it's going to be taking over. I think it is a tool that is going to change and shift how we're doing things. And we just don't quite know yet how it's going to have that impact, but it will have an impact. And the hope here is that it's ultimately going to be a positive one. But I agree with both of you. At the end of the day, it's people who have to interpret. It's the athlete and the coach who have the judgment that the AI doesn't have.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, thank you for being on the show. I've been excited to get you on. Been working for, a year now to get you on. So I really appreciate we finally got you here.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
That was another episode of Fast Talk. The thoughts and opinions expressed in Fast Talk are those of the individual. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcast. Don't forget, we're now on YouTube. As always, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. To learn more about this episode, from show notes to references, visit us at fasttalklabs.com. And to join the conversation on our forum, go to forums.fasttalklabs.com. For Lee Gerakos, Dr. Andy Pruitt, Ryan Ignatz, Jack Burke, Robbie Ventura, Matt Sharp, and Chris Case, I'm Trevor Connor. Thanks for listening.